everyone, and welcome back to the Sales Insights with Sarah podcast. So today I have a very special guest, and I'd like to introduce you all to Yekemi Otaru, who's actually my business partner. We are the co-founding directors of Dukaru Limited, who some of you will have heard about already. And I have invited Yekemi onto the show because over the last 3 years, she has taught me a lot about marketing. And I keep mentioning things like value proposition and buyer persona within my podcast episodes. But I think that Kemi is the best person to explain all of that to the audience. So welcome you, Kemi.
Thank you very much. Really good to be here, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
And I guess not everyone's going to know you. So why don't we kind of go back in time and you can tell us a little bit about, I guess, how you got into marketing, because it certainly wasn't your first career choice.
Yeah, it wasn't a straight route, was it? My background is in engineering. So I started life as a chemical engineer and I got a master's in petroleum engineering. So my first job was as a reservoir engineer, technical assistant within an oil and gas company called Total. And then I moved into production engineering roles. So yeah, not really the typical background of a marketer, but I'm really grateful to have started in that kind of position because now at Dukaru, I'm able to understand technical businesses and get into their heads a little bit. And my route to marketing really came from my interest in commercial, in the commercial side of business, the reasons that customers buy, how we know that we are delivering something unique, understanding some of the technology gaps, and almost proactively going to customers and saying, this is the future and this is how we can help you be prepared for that. So while I was at a company called Schlumberger, where I was in production engineering, I did an MBA part-time at Henley Business School. And it just turned my head. I learned so much. And even the content of the course were the sort of things I would have picked up and read in the lounge at an airport or something. It was just the sort of thing that I really, really enjoyed. So I got a lot from that. And yeah, the rest is history. I've been in marketing roles for 9 years. And Sarah and we came together in 2018, November, and became Dukaru. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey, but yeah, it's been fantastic.
And what did all your engineering colleagues think about you moving into a marketing role?
Well, some of them didn't speak to me anymore. No, they were not really understanding why I would do that. But I think it was always obvious that I was different. So where I guess the typical engineer, and I know I'm generalizing a little bit, but the typical engineer would be happy to kind of sit there and, we're building models, reservoir engineering models, we're building pipeline and doing simulation. But I was always, if you like, looking over my laptop and wondering, oh, what are they talking about? Oh, I wish I could go to that client meeting. So I was a bit more chatty than the typical engineer, a bit more extroverted, and got a buzz really from presenting and being around people and solving their problems face to face rather than behind a computer or behind a model. And it's interesting, the last few years with the turbulence in the oil and gas industry, I've had quite a few of those engineers come to me and say, how did you change careers? I really want to change careers. And, so it's kind of come round again where they feel like I may have looked into a crystal ball and known that just being an engineer might not cut it for the future. But I think my background in engineering is probably the best thing about me when it comes to what I do. So I don't regret studying engineering at all. I think that it gave me an analytical edge that a lot of marketers don't have.
And I know that you don't regret doing it, but do you think that you maybe chose, the wrong career path, when you left school? Do you feel like going into more of, creative commercial type of higher education wasn't an option, or would have been a better option, or not?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think if we go back to, my culture, so I'm Nigerian, and in Nigeria, if you didn't study engineering or law or medicine, then the general thinking is that you're not going to amount to much. So those were literally the options. You be an engineer, you be a doctor, or you be a lawyer. And if I had rocked up and said I wanted to be a marketer, that would have caused shockwaves. And I didn't know at that time, really. I just knew that I was good at quite a few things. So I was good in the sciences. especially in math. I was exceptional in math. But I think that if I had kind of career guidance and, you know, I had kind of understood myself a little bit more, or I had a mentor who had asked me the right questions, I don't think I would have ended up in engineering. I think I would have ended up reading probably a social science type subject. But yeah, it's just, you know, those things that you can't control. And I'm so grateful for coming out to the UK, because suddenly I saw all the opportunity. And it ended up making me a bit of a strange person, because so I've got this creative side, but then I've got this heavily kind of analytical, logical side as well, which is very confusing and sometimes gives me a bit of a headache. But
after working with you for the last 3.5 years now, I obviously can see that it's a strength, and that our clients love it because you understand them. And I'm always, asking Kemi to translate to me when we have a bunch of engineers in the room. Like, okay, what do they mean by that? You're
yeah,
often the translator, and vice versa, probably as well.
yeah, absolutely.
So obviously now you're inspiring other engineers to kind of follow their other potential career paths and go into other lines of work. Do you feel that, it's just because you touched on it, that the world of engineering is changing? Is that because of, the digital transformation, the AI, the technology?
It's a good question. I think engineering is always going to be the lifeblood of our existence. But obviously, engineering is changing. And so I think what people really need to be able to do is they need to be able to learn, they need to be able to follow trends and be quick to pick up what's new. I think if you're the sort of engineer who says, well, I know Newton's law, and that's literally, what you stick to. You're not looking at what else is coming up on the horizon, things like machine learning, robotics, even things like social media and data analytics, data science. That's all something that as an engineer you can pick up. So if you're an engineer who I guess I can call a learning engineer, who's a lifelong learner, then fantastic. There's always going to be a place for you in society. But I think the challenge has been with engineers who've, I guess our parents are probably like that. They've taken a job out right after school, and they've just been in that job for 30, 40 years, 20, 30 years, doing the same things over and over again. And some of what they're doing has changed, has been replaced, and they find themselves in quite a difficult position. But like I say, if you're a learner, then you should be fine. There should be a place for you.
Yeah. Well, that takes us quite nicely though into the next thing I want to talk about. So really I want to get to value proposition, but before value proposition, I think it makes sense to talk a little bit about the buyer personas that we build up. And it's something I've referenced in a few podcasts now, so it'd be good to go quite in depth on that. And I know that when we're working within technical companies, as much as we need to understand what motivates the company, we need to understand what motivates the individual and why they're going to want to buy, why are they going to be interested in our content. And even, if you just take engineering, what you've just shown me is engineering is not one thing. And even within engineering, there could be multiple buyers. So are you okay to touch on the buyer persona?
Yeah.
We spend so much time on that with our clients.
Yeah, I mean, buyer persona is an aspect of, I suppose, marketing and business that I feel is getting a bit more exposure right now and visibility, but it hasn't historically. And the whole idea is that when you make something or you develop a service, it's not for everyone. So the number of people that I would speak to over the years that have a new business idea, and I say, so who is it for? And they say, oh, everyone can buy it. It's like, well, it can't be everybody, because if you're trying to sell to everybody, then you're probably not going to sell to anyone. And so what buyer personas enable us do is that it enables us to get in the head of our ideal buyer, and especially those emotional triggers, the motivations behind why they're buying. Because when you understand that, then you can talk quite relevantly to these people. You can say, I understand your challenge. I understand what you're going through. So here is what I propose that we do to solve it. And we all know that feeling when you go somewhere, you talk to someone, and it's like they're talking to you. Like you go somewhere, and the words of the speaker, it just hits you, because that's exactly how you felt. You've been in that exact situation, and you understand how you just draw into that. You immediately just develop this trust and the person has credibility in your eyes. So that's the basis of buyer personas. So, you've got personas on the B2B side. So if you're selling to businesses, and you've got personas on the B2C side. I find that on the B2B side, it's a little less developed because people are yet to fully understand that even though you're selling to a business, you are selling to a person in that business in the end. Yes, they need to go maybe to a committee or some board to get approval, but you still need to emotionally engage with them. You still need to make them feel like you understand them. So it's not just this big bad business. It's actually somebody in there, a finance manager, a sales director, somebody. So if we kind of go into detail a little bit on, say, an example buyer persona. So for instance, if you're selling HR software into a business, it depends on what that HR software does. So you've got quite a few different HR software. Some are quite simple and maybe do the basics of login holidays or helping you track performance appraisals. And then you might have some more advanced ones that might be for bigger companies. So when you're targeting a buyer, maybe you're targeting a HR director, and then you have to think about whether that director is working for quite a big company or a small type of company. You have to think about maybe the number of reports that director has, and also the kind of specific challenge that director might be having within their organization. Do they have a challenge around budget? Do they have a challenge around people taking a lot of absences? Really understanding what that challenge is, so that when you're talking to that director, you can say something like, we work with medium-sized businesses that, have 100 to maybe 300 employees that have a specific challenge around staff that work on shift, for instance. So that could be like the specific challenge that they have. And so your software then starts to appeal to this sort of buyer, rather than going out there and trying to sell to every single HR director in the world, because they're not all gonna want to buy your software because it doesn't speak to a challenge that they have. So I think it's really, really important. And Sarah, when we do this, we go into detail about not just their job title, because job titles can be quite misleading. So we know commercial director, for instance, is one where a commercial director in one company could be someone in charge of R&D and launching new products. And then in another company, they're looking at tenders and contracts. So apart from the job title, we focus a lot on what is actually their job responsibility. What is it that they're responsible for? What are the challenges that they have? What are the typical outcomes that they want? What do they want to be able to go and say to their boss that they've achieved? And then you can come to them with a solution to help them do better. So that's kind of the B2B side of things. The B2C side is a lot of fun because you have all sorts of buyer persona. We've done a few, not as many as the B2B, but we've done a few where, there's a product that is for a woman of a certain age, working a certain kind of job, couples with a certain kind of income level, that kind of thing. And you can really start to craft the perfect buyer. And we name them, don't we? So we've got our Sassy Sally, and we've got, Buyer Barry and Business Brenda, and we name them. They're people that come to life. And when you're creating content for these people, you can look at them, their background, what they're worried about, and you can create content and marketing that actually solve their problem for them.
And I didn't mention at the start, but Kemi also has another business called Yokouture. And I'm sure that you've done a lot more in that B2C space. So for you, it's great because you've got that balance of Dukaru very much living in B2B and Yokouture living in the B2C, and seeing, the differences all the time and being able to measure that and what you need to do to reach the different types of buyers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's a lot that B2B can learn from B2C, because I think sometimes B2B can feel quite sterile, where you're just like, when you ask somebody who's your typical buyer in B2B, they'll be like, oh, SMEs, in the medical appliance sector. And that's it. Like, they don't know anything else about the people in there. But I've had a lot of fun with Yokouture. It's an African-inspired fashion brand. And very quickly, I could see that my typical buyers were women, usually in their late 30s to late 40s. They were usually creative women in kind of professional roles. They were business owners, they were also employees. But when I say creative women, they tended to be actresses, artists, designers themselves, who were absolutely blown away by colors and like to live in bold outfits and come out every day feeling like, yeah, you know, I'm sparkling and I'm standing out. So I saw that very quickly. So when I'm creating messaging, I can easily say, you know, do you want to be unique? Do you want bold, bright patterns? You know, do you want to stand out? Do you love color? And I know that those words will scare the heck out of some other person, right? A different, like you, Sarah, would be like, ah.
Kemi and I never clash when we get corporate photos done, because she's always in bright colors and I'm usually in black.
It helps though that we kind of play each other down. Yeah, the balance. But yeah, so that would scare someone else off. So I'm attracting definitely the people that want to buy what I'm selling. But it's really important for buyer persona, because then when you go on to create your value proposition, you know, your messaging, build the words on your website, talk to them in networking events, you know, and you can ask the right questions. Even if you're not sure, you're asking the right questions, because you know what that niggly feeling might be, and you can hopefully get a rant out of a prospect. I think Sarah knows this. That's the nirvana, when you ask a prospect a question and then they rant because they're so frustrated, they just tell you everything that's wrong.
And actually, another haute couture example is, I don't know, a few months ago, Kemi brought out a range of scarves, and I can't remember if we were having a face-to-face conversation or if it was something I read on the social media, but it was something along the lines of, you know, does full color outfits scare you? But you want to add a splash of color. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm comfortable with that. And I bought a scarf.
Exactly.
So, you know, even in one company, you know, each product can have you know, even that scarf, you know, for some people it's, oh, more color to my outfit. And for me, it's like, okay, I'm comfortable with the little splash of color. So even for one product, you could have multiple buyers and therefore messaging required as well.
Exactly. Absolutely. So, I mean, even within the business, we've started pushing out some additional accessories in addition to the scarf. We've got some earrings, and it's really for people who they like color. Maybe they like it on other people, but they're like, oh, I don't know how it'll look on me. So maybe they just want to dip their toes in. But I don't know if I've said this to you, Sarah, but my dream is that every woman in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire has color in her wardrobe, whether it's a dress, a top, a skirt, you know, a pair of earrings or a scarf. I need Aberdeen to go, you know, bright.
Right. Well, I'm not going to show you my wardrobe. It's very dark and dingy, but yeah. So with buyer personas, going back to, I guess, the more corporate world as well, I know we've done a lot of work around, you know, I've actually just recorded another podcast episode on this, but around, you know, the motivation to buy, that, you know, when we look at the buyer, you always go quite in depth on, okay, so they may, like, what is why, you know, what's keeping them up at night? What do they really care about? And it won't be the same thing as the company necessarily cares about, but there's this sort of individual, personal motivation, you know, as well, you know, whether that's something to make them look good, something to help them if they're a budget holder, like you said before, to save some money. And it's trying to tap into that as well. And I think that's where a lot of the businesses we meet have got confused, is they're trying to kind of come up with this buyer, as in look at the company wide as a buyer, instead of coming more into the individuals, and understanding that part of it. So not just the job titles and the responsibilities, but that piece around, you know, what keeps them up at night, as you always say. You know, what questions would they ask? What do they really care about? Can you give us some examples of, I guess, when you've sold before or supported our clients to build up buyer personas, I guess, where people make assumptions rather than actually can back that up with some data?
Yeah. It's a really good question, because I think, again, it's going back to what I said about people ignoring that they're dealing with people who have, you know, they have their own ambitions and they have things that they want to achieve within an organization. And I always say that your product or service should make the buyer a hero. So you're not the hero as a supplier, make them a hero within their organization so that they can do whatever it is. And sometimes what keeps them up at night is this lack of peace of mind and what your product or service is doing is giving them that peace of mind that they no more need to worry about that software. They no more need to worry that that process is broken. They just knowing that it's getting done could be actually the key challenge. And you coming in there and doing that is good. We often have companies just make an assumption that the buyer is maybe just looking to reduce cost, for instance. And so they come in with this very kind of cost-focused proposition. And sometimes that's not the case. And I know that right now, obviously, businesses are looking to cut costs, things are difficult and so on, but it's not always the case. And I use the example of like my dad, for instance, and if we take a phone contract. So when you have a phone contract, you have, you know, really cheap suppliers and you have a bit more expensive suppliers. But my dad always goes for 24/7 customer service. It's his thing about phone contracts. So even in Nigeria, he wants to be able to deal with a company that he can call at any time and ask questions. And that's because he's highly techie. Like he will like upload a new operating system onto his phone. Like he would take it apart and put it back up together again and all this kind of thing. He's not worried about the cost as such, if he's getting that. So if you came to that sort of buyer and you were assuming that, oh, they want a £10 contract, and you're like, it's just £10, cheap, £10, you actually put him right off, because that's just told him that it's cheap. He's not going to get someone on the phone. It's going to be a robot, and you're going to be difficult to deal with. On the flip side of that, you have other people, different buyer persona, who's really looking for something cheap and simple. It could be that, you know, it's a phone that they're going to use as a secondary phone, or a tool they're going to use as a secondary tool. So cost is absolutely what they're focused on. So to your point, Sarah, it's about asking those questions and not making assumptions and not saying the last two buyers were focused on cost, so everyone's focused on cost. Just asking those good questions. And I always see you doing this when you're having a discussion with a prospect, where you say, look, what are kind of the one or two things that you really want to get out of this? You know, we say things like, if you look back, if you work with us and you look back after 6 months or 12 months, what are some of the things you want to have achieved? So imagine yourself this time next year. What is it that you want to have achieved? And that can be really telling. The answers that they give to those questions can be really telling. And they're always different, you know, and that's why we spend this time asking those questions, to really understand what it is that keeps them up at night.
Yeah, I think measuring as well. I know it's something that, especially this year, where online's become very busy, social media has become very busy. You need to stand out, but also when we've worked with businesses and they've made an assumption on that buyer persona, it's being able to test it so that they actually, it's quite, you know, if they've spoken to 5 customers and they all said the same thing, okay, it gives you a direction, but it doesn't mean that the next 800 of them are going to say the same thing. So, you know, it's trying to take, I guess, a baseline and then test it and measure it, so that in a couple of months you really understand who the buyer persona is. And I think more companies are starting to want to invest their time, energy, you know, money in testing instead of assuming, which is great to see. And it's something that, you know, I've been working as, you know, as a consultant for 5 years, and that's been a bit of a bugbear for me, is that people make a lot of assumptions but aren't willing to really test them out to come up with the answers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think even when, you know, you do a piece of research, like when I did my master's, for instance, you always start with some sort of assumption, what we call a hypothesis. So, you know, what are those kind of top 3 or 4 things that you've assumed? And you might have assumed that your typical buyer works for a certain kind of business, or your typical buyer has this kind of problem, or they have this kind of budget. But after that, all you should be focused on is proving that right or wrong, because it's fine to start with assumptions, because if you wait until you have all the answers, then you'll never actually make a step. But you have to focus on verifying those assumptions. So either, you know, it's right or it's wrong. And some of the ways that we do that is definitely this data-driven approach that we take, where, you know, we have a certain buyer persona that we've maybe developed, and we think this is the ideal buyer. So we start to share certain messages, certain kind of content, and you can measure how well they're engaging with that sort of content. So when people engage with your content, look at who has engaged with it, who is commenting and liking, what's their job title, what's their responsibility, what part of the world are they? And, you know, it might sound a bit stockish, but you could even look at the other kind of content that they engage with as well. You know, what else are they interested in? And you start to build an idea of who is this typical buyer. I remember one that caught me unawares a few years ago. There's a tool called YouGov. I don't know if it's still around. I think it is, but it used to be a brilliant tool for market research, where if you put certain products and services in, it would tell you kind of a typical person as buying those. There was a free service, but I think it's paid now. But anyway, a few years ago, I was looking at typical salespeople and people that use certain products and services. And one interesting thing I found was your typical salesperson, if it was a female, they were usually into horses as well, which was very, very interesting. So a sales executive, if she's a certain age range, I think it was 25 or younger, will also be into horses and will be a horse rider. And then there was a link between people that drive Vauxhall and people that shop at John Lewis. So if you drive a Vauxhall, you're likely to be a big John Lewis fan, apparently, through this data. So those kind of tenuous links, it might not look relevant, but it means that if you see a Vauxhall in a John Lewis advert, it might be because they found that their clients or their customers typically drive Vauxhall, for instance. This was years ago. But you can, by watching your target audience and doing this kind of data gathering and data testing and asking questions, you find these links, which means you can have actual conversations with them. You can know that your buyers generally like living in the country. So it's not like you're gonna sell them a house in the country, but you've got a conversation starter. You've got a bit of context around your ads, for instance, if that's the way you're going as a business. So it's very valuable.
Yeah, I'm just thinking for anyone looking to launch a new sales technology, get advertised in all the local riding schools. Yeah,
exactly.
Bizarre. But that takes us nicely into actually value proposition, because we've spoken about, who's the buyer, what do they care about, and then you've just spoken a lot about content, who's reading the content. But within that content, we both know one of the things most businesses miss is a great value proposition, or they assume that you need one value proposition for everything in your business. So yeah. I'm going to just let you go for it here, Kemi, because I know that's something you're super passionate about. You could talk about all day. But what do you think that the people listening to this podcast need to know about value proposition?
Yeah, I think value propositions are really important. And a number of people I meet that say, if you're in an elevator with your ideal buyer, well, congrats, first of all, if you know that they are your ideal buyer, congrats, because some people wouldn't even know. But if you were in an elevator with someone and you said, oh my gosh, this is like the exact sort of person I want to sell to, do you have that one or two sentences that will grab their attention and they will say, tell me more?
But not an elevator pitch.
Not an elevator pitch.
Yeah. So you use an elevator as your example.
Yeah, it can be quite confusing, and there's a distinct difference between the two. I think with a value proposition, what you need to know first is what we've been talking about, this buyer persona. And it's not uncommon for a business to have more than one buyer persona. I mean, we have quite a few buyer personas. I think the last time I counted, it's probably 6 or 7, because you're dealing with different types of people. And it means that you can give a more tailored, suited service. So if you're in the elevator, it's not a pitch, but you understand that this person is, maybe a marketing meg. So marketing meg might be someone who is in a marketing role and is leading marketing in the organization, and you want to pitch your graphic design service. I wouldn't recommend just pitching, because first of all, you haven't understood what your value proposition is. First of all, you need to understand, right, marketing meg is my buyer persona. The second aspect of a value proposition is you have to understand what the challenge is. Otherwise, you just start shooting from the hip where you're being very irrelevant. So you have to understand, what is marketing meg's challenge? Why would she want a graphic designer? Why would she be unhappy with maybe the current state of things? Understand things like, does she have a graphic designer in her team already? Does she want to hire a graphic designer? Has she dealt with other graphic designers and maybe had a bad experience? Is she really interested in, say, a graphic designer that has certain skills, maybe has worked with technology companies before and so understands what would be working for them? Is she all about the price? Is she looking for quite a cheap graphic designer? Or is she looking for a graphic designer that works really quickly? So maybe she works in a large organization, usually needs a fast turnaround, those sort of things. So you need to understand that about your marketing meg. And you can see that even from that, you have quite a few different buyer personas. So you could have marketing meg who's looking up for the cheapest graphic designer, that's possible. You could have marketing meg who's just looking for someone who is really quick, that she can say, right, we need this turned around by the end of tomorrow, and you would be able to do it. She's not worried about price as such, not worried about the location where you're based or anything. She just wants you to be fast. So you can have quite a few different buyer personas. So you have buyer persona, then you have the what, which is the challenge. How are you going to solve that? How are you going to flip that? And then the part that most people miss, even when they actually develop the value proposition, they miss the so what. So the so what question has to do with the ultimate outcome people are looking for. So marketing isn't just looking for a graphic designer that is quick. That's not the end game. Ultimately, she's looking for, it could be peace of mind. She's looking for her accelerate the performance of her marketing team, maybe be able to deliver high quality marketing projects. It might be about revenue and profit, that the faster this graphic designer turns things around, the more clients she can get in the door, the more revenue, or even it increases her profit margin. So that's ultimately what she's trying to achieve. So if you miss that, then you end up being, I would say, in that bracket of being commoditized. You're just kind of like, in the bucket with everyone else. But once you have that so what, then you're talking to this higher level outcome that you see the board is interested in, the senior executives are interested in. So if you went into imagine you went into a board meeting and you were looking for a budget for something. If you went in there and said, yeah, we're looking for a really fast graphic designer, like that's not very interesting. But if you came in and said, look, we found out that if we can get our graphic designer to turn around in 2 days work that the previous one was turning around in 5 days, it means that our profit margins will go up by 2.5% by the end of next quarter. Whoa, the board is looking at you and going, really? How much do you need for that? Straight away, because you're speaking to the so what. Okay, so that's where I think that people tend to miss it. And I do quite an elaborate masterclass, very geeky, 1.5 hours long, where I speak about there's a different kind of parts of a value proposition and how to craft those different parts. There are 3 parts: the who, which is the buyer persona, the what, which is around the challenge and how you're going to flip that, and the so what, the desired outcome. And there's a lot a business owner has to think about, or business development person has to think about when they're crafting this. Things like, what is making you stand out of your competition? It really forces you to reflect on that rather than just copying what other people are doing or just making a whole bunch of assumptions. So for instance, something I cover in the masterclass is whether you're going to sell more or make it for less, right? So sell for more or make it for less. So selling for more means that you're looking at yourself as more in the kind of top part of the market space, more a premium provider that can charge a little bit more or a lot more than what other people are charging for. And you can do that because maybe you've got cutting edge technology or something, or you're particularly quick, you've got the speed, it could be a quality thing, the expertise, the years in the industry. But for some reason, you're able to charge maybe 20 grand when everyone else is charging 12 or 15 grand, right? So with that in mind, you can then look at your value proposition and your ideal buyer. If you're saying your ideal buyer actually is looking for something cheap, then you're probably in the wrong space, for instance. And then there's kind of making it for less, which is, I suppose, the opposite of that you're able to charge less than, I guess, the market average because you found a way to make your underlying cost lower than everyone else, right? The challenge with that approach, though, is only one person can be the cheapest in the market. And you don't want to end up undercutting your prices to the point where it's not just a viable business anymore. But it is a strategy that some businesses use. So if you look at your Walmart, for instance, it will always be about being cheaper, and Asda plays with that as well, being the cheaper one in the market. When you look at selling it for more, you start thinking about Apple, for instance, those kind of businesses that are really innovative, and people would line up overnight to get the very latest version of their iPhone, even though it's £1,000, right? So there's something underlying there. So when you start thinking about all that as a business owner and as a business development person, it helps you understand who you're really selling to and what challenge it is that you're selling what challenge it is that you're solving by selling to them, and the so what question. And the so what question doesn't need to be elaborate. I mean, sometimes the so what is peace of mind. The so what, especially if you're in the B2C space, the so what can be prestige, that just these people just want to have the latest
The
because
so what part seems to tap into that individual motivation a lot more. There was one that we worked on recently. It was like, we support health and safety directors with X, and peace of mind came to that. Now the company doesn't want peace of mind. You know, the individuals within the company want the peace of mind.
Yeah.
So I think that sort of what can be quite, I guess, in the B2B space, the more corporate stuff, you know, those words like efficiency, cost saving, a lot of the time come into that part.
Yes, sustainability is one that's coming out quite a lot as well, just with people moving towards maybe more greener solutions and wanting to be a more sustainable type of business. That's also coming into it, because no matter how, I guess, cheap you are, more and more companies are asking, yes, but is it sustainable? Is it something that will last? What's the long-term effect of what it is you're doing? And a lot of companies are coming up where their main value proposition is around sustainability, and they're able to sell for more based on sustainability. The quick example is things like when you go into the shops and you're buying carrots. So you have organic carrots and you have normal carrots, right? So organic carrots it's all about the health, but it's more expensive. So you can sell it for more because it's organic. And what's the motivation of the person buying it? It's usually some health reasons, they want to be healthy. And sometimes it's also prestige, they're buying organic carrots. That's prestigious. So it's really trying to tap into that and walking in the shoes of your buyer. And I think the more you can do that as a business, you'll find you'll be more successful. And initially it will feel like you're excluding quite a lot of the market. And that's fine. It can be scary, especially if you're a new business. It means you're saying no to certain people in the market. And I know for me anyway, when I started my first business in 2016, that was really scary. You don't say no to business. You're trying to grow your pipeline and so on. But you find that the more you think about value proposition and the more you flesh it out and you reflect, you find that actually, clients will come or prospects will come, and you'll be thinking, actually, we're not the best fit for you. Because this is actually what we excel at. And the more you can do that, the more you can actually make more money and really become part and parcel of your client's world, where they become quite dependent on you, not just as a supplier, but even as an advisor and somebody that understands what they're all about.
Yeah, I completely agree at that. Saying no to business. And I think, for startups, that's always terrifying. But I think right now we've got a lot of really established companies that are starting to say yes to things they would never have said yes to before, because they're really struggling, with COVID, with, downturns in different industries. But that can become very messy. So it's trying to kind of rein it in if possible and focus. And you always say to me, if we sell to everyone, we're selling to no one, which I think is a really powerful statement. And it's so true. And I think once you start building out, your buyer personas, your value propositions, it actually really builds confidence in you as a business to say no. Whereas if you don't do that, you don't have, I guess, the data to back up why you're refusing work and saying no to work, then it's going to be scary, and you're really in the weeds. Whereas if you can grow as a business and grow your strategies around this stuff, it's much more comfortable. And I know this year, we've said no to a lot of work, which, when we're looking at the the figures, we're thinking, oh, did we make the right decision there? But I think it's made us stronger as a business, and people know who we are. Whereas if we said yes to everything, I think it's really difficult for that audience to describe who you are as a business, because you're very generalist and you don't focus on anything. You don't show off what you excel at as a business through the value propositions. But I think it's something that a lot of people listening to the podcast will probably be struggling with right now because of the current times.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the more you focus, the more you find your typical buyer will come to you, actually, rather than you going to them. They'll come to you because you'll be known in a certain space. And it doesn't mean that once in a while you don't kind of, I guess, take on things that you would normally take on. Like for us, for instance, we always say, we do a lot of social media management stuff for our clients, but it tend to be clients that have come in doing something else. We've done maybe a sales strategy and we're managing their sales development for them, or we're taking care of their content marketing, and they need a bit of support around the social media management. And so we do it for them, but we wouldn't sort of advertise that, right, we're social media managers, because that's not really a core service that that we offer. And it sometimes it's scary because people will come and want specifically just a social media service, and it's being able to say no to that. But like this year, I'm sure a lot of people listening would have had situations where they've taken on work that they wouldn't normally take on just because of the times, and I think that's totally fine. I think having the ability to look into your almost arsenal of all the tools and knowledge and skills that you have in your business and say, okay, what else can we be selling right now, is very, very powerful. So I think what we're saying is really for, I guess, a typical business kind of year, if you like. But if you're able to look into that, I guess, toolkit and say, right, we can do this. These are all the things that we can be doing. It might not be what we normally do as our core business, but if you can dip into that in the time of crisis, when you need to be more innovative, you need to kind of pivot, even if it's for a short while, I think that's also really powerful.
I think, pulling on the resources that you don't usually use also kind of pushes you back to why you don't usually do that business.
Yeah.
And it's not because you're not good at it or not, competent in it, but it's not aligning with other sort of objectives you have in the business. And I think if you start doing too much of that and stop thinking about the value proposition and buyer personas, then it can get quite messy. Whereas if you're doing it on purpose, you're doing it for a purpose, and you're very clear on what that is, then it doesn't mess up everything else, because you're doing the strategic bit over here. But it's been a tough year for businesses, and I think many businesses that haven't been online, they haven't focused on their content, their marketing. They're really reliant on referrals and word of mouth and existing business relationships. We're seeing a lot of them come out of the woodwork this year and start testing all of this stuff, which is great, because that's the way it's going. And if they can put that together with a consultative selling approach of asking the right questions early, like you said before, if you can get a customer ranting, or for me, I want a customer to say, I don't know, I'm stuck. If that's what they're saying to me, then I know I can help them. But I want to pull out as much objections or object early in the conversation as possible. And a lot of businesses see objections as a negative thing. But as we know, they're very powerful, because if you can overcome those objections early in your process, you qualify in the right way. You qualify out as well as in, but that you're qualifying out of the pipeline for the right reasons. And a lot of that will be based around really knowing the buyer, having the right messaging, asking the right questions. And, the whole, actually, I can see it behind you for anyone that sees a video version of this, unified business growth. So we set up Ducaru to fully align all things sales and marketing, because too often they were completely separate. And I guess that's an example of that. It's, if you have the right content going out, but your salespeople aren't asking the right questions and qualifying properly, it's going to fall flat on its face. You're going to have a very large top of the funnel, and it's going to close up somewhere. And if you're not doing the content, you're going to have a very slim funnel at the top. So, we are always looking at ways that we can maximize bringing that alignment together.
Absolutely. I think for people listening, if you're wondering how when you're, I guess, going out of that kind of focus, a good example would be if you've just got a new client on board and you're finding that you're having to tweak your processes or change what you would normally do. And you can just, from how you're feeling, it's like it's different to what you normally do. Then you've actually taken on a client that is not your typical buyer persona, which is fine, as long as, like Sarah was saying, it's deliberate. Like, you know that that's what you've done. I think that's really, really important. And in terms of the funnel, when I work for myself, just me, I know that it's quite hard when you bring in leads in the top end, and then you spend all your time servicing those clients when they come to fruition, and then you look, oh, my pipeline is completely empty, and then you go back to feeding that pipeline, and you're not doing the work that's coming through. So it's one way or the other. And part of what we do at Ducaro is help our clients look at both ends of the funnel. So make sure that they've got qualified leads coming in, that are their buyer persona, that the sort of work that they want to be doing. Sarah asks great questions about resources, what their long-term goals are, and making sure that they can service those leads that come in. And then even when those clients, those prospects, become clients, is understanding the role of account management as well, and making sure that you're looking at all that. And value proposition plays a big role even in the account management piece. I think there's a key role for account managers where they can bring that additional, almost like person-to-person interaction, and understand the buyer so much more, the eyes and ears. They can understand, what was the challenge? How did their manager within the buyer organization receive that? And actually get to intimately know what it is that makes this organization tick. So I see a nice connection between kind of account managers going back into marketing, so that it's almost like your buyer persona puzzle. You start to fit it all in, and you get all this little bits of information about your buyer persona, and you validate or not different assumptions that you've made about your buyer persona, because there will be assumptions as normal, but you can say, actually, we thought that this would be what he cared about the most, but this is actually what he cares about based on what the account manager has been finding in his time working closely with that new client, that kind of thing. So there's an aligned approach, and that's, I guess, where we try to steer our clients towards, isn't it, Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just aware of time. I think that's been a great, I guess, foundation of all things buyer persona and value proposition for the listeners. But I think I'll put your link to your masterclass within the notes. And please feel free to follow Yekemi on social media, because she's always giving loads of content around these topics. So if this is, I guess, whet your appetite and you want to nail this for your business and really onboard it, then I would recommend following Kemi. Do you want to let everyone know where the best places are to follow you?
Yes. So I'm on LinkedIn. So just send me a connection request. I'm delighted to connect there. I'm also quite active on Instagram as well. So it would just be Yekemi Otaru on Instagram. So at Yekemi Otaru on Instagram, and also Twitter. So Yekemi_Otaru if you want to follow me on Twitter. I think those are my main 3 platforms.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been fun, and I guess we don't get to do this very often because usually we're delivering together. So we're listening to each other all the time. And like I said right at the start, I've learned so much from you when it comes to strategic marketing.
Likewise.
In the last 3 years. And I love that we can continuously learn and grow together, and share that and share our insight and our experiences with our network as well. So thank you so much for joining me. And
thank you for having me. It was fun.
Thanks to everyone for listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye.